Hi, this is Frank Walker, special edition of the Stumbling Block. We have the great polemicist George Newmayer, who has gone around doggedly, risking his neck sometimes, getting his phone broken, and really doing a lot to put the pressure on Cardinal Wuerl. Thanks for everything you've done, George. So it looks like Cardinal Wuerl is set to be resigned. He's written a pre-resignation letter to his archdiocese. What happens next for Cardinal Wuerl? Is this? I worry that this might be sort of a trick or something, another gimmick, but that's not what I'm hearing. What do you think?
No, it's going to happen. He is out, and I know the reasons why he decided to quit this week. There's a mass that's going to be held on Friday at St. Matthew's Cathedral, and they were worried. The people around Wuerl and the people around him were worried that there would be a big protest at that mass. And so they wanted to basically call off the dogs by announcing right now that he is going to be quitting, and that way that mass on Friday wouldn't turn into a complete debacle. And so that was one reason, but there are other reasons too why he quit this week. One big reason was that he held that priestly confab on Labor Day, after having met with Pope Francis. Pope Francis had said to him in their meeting at the Vatican, he said, you need to get the vote of confidence of your priests. And in order for you to continue, you absolutely need the support of your priests. And so Pope Francis, in effect, set up a test for Wuerl. And that test was on Labor Day. The Labor Day priestly confab was the evaluation of that test, and Wuerl failed that test. He did that. The priestly confab was a flop, and I know this because I was there. I was the only reporter there, and because I came to that event, and because Mark Sullivan, Obama's former head of the Secret Service, who left in disgrace after 12 of his agents were ensnared in a prostitution scandal in Colombia.
Obama's man.
It turns out that Mark Sullivan was running security for Cardinal Wuerl at that priestly confab, and I know because he came out to talk to me, and he said, this is a closed event, and I said, I want to go to the church and pray, and I have a canonical right to do so, and Sullivan said to me, well, I'll have to check on that. And I said, what is your name? And he said, Mark Sullivan. And I said, do you work for the Archdiocese of Washington? And he tried to pass himself off as a mere parishioner at Little Flower. But nevertheless, I got that on tape, and it triggered my memory of this guy. He looked awfully familiar to me, and I wondered, who is this guy? Well, it turns out he was Obama's disgraced head of the Secret Service. And he now runs a security firm called GSIS, which I assume Cardinal Wuerl hired to provide security for himself for this event, and I think for other events. And at any rate, I established that Obama's head of the Secret Service was running working security for Wuerl at this priestly confab at Little Flower, which turned out horribly. The priest I was told that the priest, a well-placed church insider connected to Wuerl's circle, told me that the priests at the confab were very upset with Wuerl for his lying about the McCarrick scandal. And the priest, even though the priests were being very deferential at the event and trying to not offend Wuerl too much, they nevertheless made it clear to Wuerl that they thought he was lying about the McCarrick scandal. And so that was one reason why they wouldn't give him a vote of confidence. And so basically, that event did not go well for Wuerl. And the proof of that was, which I learned from a source, was that Wuerl didn't even attend the dinner after the event. There was a cookout after the event, and I was told that Wuerl just gave the blessing at that event and then took off.
He
He didn't want to eat with his glum priest who had just been basically telling him that, you're a total liar on the McCarrick business. You knew damn well that McCarrick was a predator. That's in effect what they were saying to him, in a very muted and diplomatic way. So that was one reason. So the priestly confab was a flop. So this test that was set up by Francis
Worked.
Wuerl failed that test, and then Wuerl thinks to himself, well, how could I survive? Given that the priestly confab didn't work out, what else could I do to survive? And then he thought, well, I'll go over to the John Paul II Seminary and see if I can take a group photo with the seminarians in which they back me, and we're all looking very happy, and then we can send out the group photo, and everybody will think that things are great in the Archdiocese of DC. Well, I learned from a Chancery connected source that on the very day that happened, that it was a Wednesday, it was on I guess last Wednesday, I heard about this group photo that Wuerl wanted to set up. And these guys, apparently the seminarians made it clear they did not want to participate in the group photo with Wuerl. They were not excited to be in the company of a disgraced cardinal.
This takes a lot of courage on the part of the seminarians.
Yeah, so the seminarians basically also gave Wuerl a thumbs down. And so there was total panic at the seminary. And the seminary has no endowment. The seminary, as far as I know, that's what I've been told by a Chancery-connected source. It has no endowment. It has no endowment, and therefore it's totally dependent on the Archbishop's annual appeal. And with a corrupt and disgraced cardinal, it's very hard to raise money for that thing, and they know that.
Adding up.
So there was panic at the seminary, and then I was told that because of the tweet I sent out at 3:30 on that day, Wuerl was just in a complete freak-out mode, and he had 3 police cars sent to the seminary at 5 o'clock on the assumption that I was going to be there, and he thought I was poking around in the seminary.
If he resigns, will he have Secret Service protection like the president?
I don't know, but anyway, he sends these police officers to the seminary thinking that I'm there. He sends one of his goons to search the grounds because he thinks that I'm poking around. One of the things that I had reported, which nobody picked up on, which I had heard from a Chancery-connected source, is that Wuerl has been very secretly building for himself a retirement pad at the JP2 seminary. And this has been very hush-hush, and this is something that Wuerl did not want getting out.
Doesn't look good.
So at any rate, that second event, the event with the seminarians, was just as much of a flop as the priestly confab. And so after that, Wuerl and his team were basically looking at an endless public relations crisis, and the only way to end it would be to announce that Wuerl was going to go to Rome and meet with the Pope, and the Pope would accept his resignation. Wow. And that way, this event on Friday at the cathedral won't turn into an epic disaster.
Wow. The Americanos have had some effect, I guess. We keep hearing about how the American church is so damaging. I think that's good news. That's a step in the right direction. I read that you're on the wall in the Archdiocese most wanted list.
Yeah, well, that was part of this. That was part of the panic that led to this this finale where Wuerl just quits. It is that Wuerl was so furious with my reporting of his misdeeds. His face was as red, apparently, as his robes, when he was talking about me and thinking about what I was either disclosing or about to disclose. And so he told Rossi, I guess his pit bull over at the Basilica, Monsignor Rossi, that he wanted all the Basilica officials told that if they saw me frequenting the sacraments at the Basilica or anywhere at the Basilica, they should immediately call the police. And that's how frightened he was of having to deal with my very ordinary kind of reporting. I didn't use any particularly unconventional rules I didn't use any unconventional.
Your questions were very scary, I thought.
No, but I mean, I never used any unconventional rules of journalism when covering Donald Wuerl. It was all standard journalistic techniques, and
yeah.
and they acted, because Wuerl has always received kid glove treatment from the Catholic press, and because he's received either no coverage or favorable coverage from the secular media, he was totally unprepared for somebody like me to come along and do real reporting on him.
Right.
And
that's
why,
so valuable.
And that's why he had to put me on this most wanted list and tell Rossi and all the people at the Basilica, the moment you see this guy, call the police.
So George, do you think that the Holiness has somebody really holy lined up to replace him? Cardinal Wuerl in Washington?
Well, now I would say to DC Catholics, send the following message to the Vatican, to the Holy Father, which is, we will not accept anyone who has any DC-based ties to McCarrick and Wuerl. And it has to be the successor to Wuerl has to be an outsider. It has to be somebody who is not in any way compromised by the McCarrick-Wuerl regime.
That's hard to find.
And that's hard to find. But I was told by a church insider that of all of the plausible choices before Pope Francis right now, the least bad choice is Archbishop Hebda from Minnesota, from Minneapolis, who has a reputation for coming in and cleaning up messes. And this church insider said he's the least bad choice, because the other choices are people like, one name that has been thrown out, which is just outrageous, is McElroy from San Diego, and that should be regarded as it's a complete non-starter. I mean, McElroy knew all about the McCarrick being a predator, and that's been very well established. Richard Sipe went to McElroy and said, Cardinal McCarrick is a predator, and McElroy just blew him off. So
yeah,
in addition, he has all sorts of other problems besides that one.
I can't imagine this working out. Francis Vatican coming up with somebody good for Washington. It's just, I think we've got to have more pressure.
We've had two gay mafia cardinals in a row. McCarrick and Wuerl.
That's true.
And the faithful in D.C. have to make it crystal clear to the Holy Father, we will not accept a third gay mafia cardinal. And so D.C. needs an outsider. It needs somebody who has a reputation for holiness, and for not being a clericalist monster the way McCarrick and Wuerl was. And I just of the plausible choices before Francis, according to this source I've got, Hebda is like the least bad one.
Okay,
so.
Well, they know him maybe in Minneapolis too. We just heard that Francis has announced yet another synod, which you know how well those go. Where they make a bunch of phony documents and then they have a fake vote over it. And this synod is for abuse and protection of minors. There they go again, making it all about minors. It's really about young men, seminarians. It's a homosexual problem. How do you think this is going to go over?
Like a lead balloon. It's a joke. It's this Vatican has zero credibility on the subject. And yeah, if you want to hold a synod on the gay mafia, on the problem of the gay mafia. Hold a synod on how the church should decapitate the gay mafia in the Catholic Church, because that's the source of the problem. The reason why 15, 16, and 17-year-old boys have been abused at an alarming rate within the Catholic Church, the reason for that is that for the last 50 years, gay bishops have been ordaining gay priests, and gay bishops have been consecrating other gay bishops, and all these guys have a toleration for pederasty. That is why 80% of the abuse cases involve 15, 16, and 17-year-old boys.
And almost everybody understands this. So when they see this synod with all of these men, I don't think they're going to be very impressed. Something else needs to happen.
But if they want to have a synod, it should be a synod on what could we possibly do to create the conditions for priestly holiness. What could we possibly do to bring into the priesthood men who will not in any way harm young people, and will not only care about their bodily welfare, but will care about their spiritual welfare, and will work to help these young Catholics acquire a faith that will allow them to enter into the eternal and infinite life of God, which is, that's the purpose of everything the church is supposed to be doing. The church is supposed to be bringing people into the eternal and infinite life of God.
Wow, what a crazy idea!
I know it's a crazy.
Why do they put you on that wall when you say things like that? I don't understand. The grand juries. Where do you think this is heading? They keep lining up one state after another, saying that they're going to do different things. Do you think that this is going to continue to build it? If so, I keep reading bad things about Cardinal O'Malley every day, for example, and then you have Supich in Chicago. Do you have any idea what we can expect over the next year from these grand juries in this?
Well, I think what is it, 8 states now have attorney generals who want to investigate the Catholic Church.
Today's Kentucky.
And it'll increase. So, the secular society has basically said to AmChurch, since you will not police yourselves, we will police you. And the Catholic laity, to the extent that it's paying attention and cares, is backing that secular society on that and saying good for secular society, because obviously our guys, our bishops, will not police themselves, and they will not. These guys
Right.
have been breaking RICO laws by. They knew perfectly well that McCarrick was abusing, mistreating young people. They knew perfectly well that he was mistreating seminarians, and which could have possibly involved 17-year-olds. They knew that, and they protected him, and they all protected him, and that is no different than what the mob does, and that's
A criminal
yeah.
enterprise.
So I have been told by parents in the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C., this mother said to me, just point blank, she said, Donald Wuerl is a criminal, and he is running a criminal syndicate.
Wow.
And I was the one who reported, by the way, I found out from a concerned Catholic in D.C. that right now in the Archdiocese of D.C. there is a priest, a discalced Carmelite priest named Father Emmanuel Batasso, who came to D.C. maybe 3 years ago after having been arrested for having grabbed a 18-year-old male in a hot tub, and he groped this male, and he was arrested, and the police said, "Why did you do it?" And the Father Batasso said it was a cheap thrill. He was in this
That won't go over.
He was in this hot tub with this 18-year-old at a country club. They were naked, and he grabbed this. He groped this young man, and I was told that he lost his pastorship in Wisconsin. His order suspended him, but then he turned up in Washington D.C. and I guess his order, lifted the suspension, and so he was able to relocate to D.C. And then in D.C. he would hold retreats. He would, as early as this year, earlier this year, he was advertising for a retreat at the Washington Retreat House. And I'm told that he's the spiritual director for these various groups.
Wow.
But at any rate, this concerned Catholic said that she wrote a letter to Wuerl's, or she alerted archdiocesan officials, and she said, this guy's a problem, and Donald Wuerl should remove this discalced Carmelite from his archdiocese, because he could do in D.C. what he did in Wisconsin to a 16-year-old or a 15-year-old or whatever. And she said she was completely blown off, or that her concern was not greeted with any seriousness by Wuerl and his people. And what I learned was that Wuerl basically said, he very cynically said to his people, Father Hot Tub. He didn't say Father Hot Tub, but I call this guy Father Hot Tub. But he basically said, this guy's not my problem, and he could legalistically, he could be in a very narrow legalistic way. I guess he could say, well, this guy isn't my problem.
I'm only
But
the Cardinal of D.C.
in
That's all.
reality, it was his problem, and it just shows that he doesn't give a tinker's damn about the protection of young people.
And he hasn't for a long time.
And that he just hides behind lying legalisms.
Yeah.
And that's why he lost all credibility in this during this this scandal. People could see that he did the same thing up in Pittsburgh. It was never about it was never about making the church holy. It was never about protecting kids. It was only, to the extent that Wuerl exerted himself in this area, it was to minimize the church's liability.
Well, he's on his way to Rome, and I think that we're out of time. So thank you, George.
welcome.
I encourage everybody to help George's effort. Sometimes he seems like he's in it all by himself, but thank God for what he's been able to do for us. And God bless you, George, and God save the church.